Dan Szymborski with FanGraph back with us here in San Diego. So we appreciate it, Dan. And with pitchers and catchers reporting in less than a month, the Padres have some serious needs still when you look at both their 40-man and 26-man roster. What is the biggest need when you look at the San Diego Padres at this point?
Well, I guess at this point it's figuring out first how to fill out the pitching staff, especially the rotation. And you still have to kind of figure out what to do to replace Juan Soto's production. Even if the pitchers they got in return are a gain over the long term, there is a short-term consequence in terms of 2024. The outfield is a lot thinner. The rotation is thin. So there is a lot to do, and I don't know if they're going to be able to do everything they need to.
So how does that affect this, their projections and their win total for this year? If they go into the season with it truly being like a developmental year, and a lot of guys that are going to be filling these holes that they have aren't major league ready guys, how much do you think that's going to affect this team this upcoming season?
Well, if you look at the various projection runs that different systems have done, Zip, Steamer, the general consensus is right now they're a 500 team. Obviously, there's some give and take there, as we know when predicting the future. But they definitely go in with their weakest start of season status if they froze the rosters today than they have in several years now.
Dan Szymborski with FanGraphs with us right now on Jon and Jim. You mentioned the Juan Soto trade. What did you make of that deal, and what does it mean for the Padres in terms of their return? I mean, obviously they wanted to free up salary, but what did you make of the trade and what the Padres got back?
Well, I think if you're going to trade Juan Soto, they did what they kind of needed to do. They got some pitching depth, which they need long term. You look at the rotation and the pitchers they've had, the starters over the last 3, 4, 5 years, they're pretty much down to just Musgrove and Darvish. Darvish is getting up there. Musgrove is coming off an injury, and the team does not have a whole slew of hurlers coming through the minors right now that would just storm into the majors and make everything right. So if you're trading Juan Soto, then that's what you get in return. You try to get those pitching needs because the Padres still have a pretty good offense. There's some holes, but they still have that core mostly intact. But I mean, if you're going to trade Soto, I mean, it's only a year of Soto. You're not going to get, 7 or 8 top 100 prospects or anything.
Yeah, and one of the pitchers that they got back in the deal, Michael King, he's expected to be put right in this rotation right away. Is he a guy that Padres fans could expect to be, a legitimate, middle to potentially top end starter, or is he a guy that it's going to be a question mark?
There's a lot of to be determined when you're talking about moving someone who's been mostly in relief the last few years, putting him back in starting. And no, he's not going to ever probably throw 200 innings because who does anymore? Mm-hmm. But there's some risk there, and I think that's the right thing to do. When it comes down to it, getting a starter is more valuable than a reliever. And if it doesn't work out as a starter, then the general belief is probably going to be that he'll just be fine as a reliever. That's not the worst fallback position in the world. He's been an excellent reliever for the Yankees for 2.5 years. So I think that they're good to be ambitious and to try to stretch the roles that someone like King can be used in.
Dan Szymborski, FanGraphs with us right now on Jon and Jim. Dan, I think you were the first that kind of brought it to our attention that, hey, Ha-Seong Kim could be a guy that gets a deal like Dansby Swanson. I mean, he could get 100, 150, even more dollars potentially than that. Now, he's got 1 year left on his deal. There's been some speculation here locally that maybe the Padres would consider moving Ha-Seong Kim, and that it's been at least discussed internally. Would a Ha-Seong Kim trade make sense for the Padres?
I think that there's always a trade that makes sense for someone. I don't believe in having players that you don't talk about in a trade. You always are willing to talk. I don't think they get quite the haul that they got for Soto, but I think that if you look at the team and their needs in the next few years, and if you're talking about 2024 being a down season and you get someone who can help you 2025, 2026, and so on, it's hard to really turn that down, even if it does kind of feel bad, considering the team never really got to the lofty goals they set out 4 or 5 years ago.
Free agency is still very slow. There's a lot of big-time free agents that are still out there, Dan. But when you look at the top tier, I don't think Padres are going to be anywhere close to anybody in the top tier. And I'm talking to like Bellinger, Snell, Hader, of course. But when you're looking to the middle to bottom tier, right, the bargain deals, is there any players out there that you suspect would be a good bargain deal buy?
I think that depending on how the team feels about Machado's health, I think someone like Jorge Soler in a DH role could be a good pickup for the team. If you can't replace Grisham and Soto, you can at least get an upgraded DH. I think given that there are some question marks at left and center, that they can't really use DH as a rotating, give everyone a day off position. I don't think they have the depth to do that. So Soler would be a lot of fun. I think they're probably going to talk about, there are still relievers out there, maybe Dave Robertson on a 1-year deal. Obviously, I think Jordan Montgomery is also probably out of their price range. But I don't know, maybe Michael Taylor could be. I mean, he has a very good glove. He could fill in at center field. There are options. They're just not really options that would replace Soto, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Right,
there's very few options of that. They might be in the Hall of Fame, the guys that can replace Juan Soto. Dan Szymborski, FanGraphs with us on Jon and Jim. Fernando Tatis Jr. projections. Are we expecting a huge bounce back, a little bit of a bounce back from last year? What do the systems say?
Well, Zips at least thinks he's going to have a pretty big bounce back. Steamer tends to agree, too. Not quite to his 2020, 2021 level, but a good about 100 points of OPS better than in 2023. I mean, he was coming off a missed season with an injury, with a suspension. I think one of the good things about Tatis is he turned out to be a really good defensive outfielder, and that gives a lot more runway to how he can be a valuable player. Because even in what wasn't a great season from him, he was still a really big contributor. Obviously, the offense was not where he wanted to be. He was hitting 25, not 40 home runs. But I think that if he's the biggest problem on the team, the Padres have already won 110 games or something. So it doesn't make sense to worry about him. And if he struggles, well, there wasn't much you could do about that anyway.
First base, I think, is another issue for this team. It's not as glaring as left field or center field, but Jake Cronenworth has been at first base the last couple of years for this team, rotating guy there, and he's definitely gone down as far as production the last couple seasons. If he is their primary first baseman, Dan, how much of a problem is that? Because you're not getting the production you need out of a first baseman that you get from Jake Cronenworth.
I think left field might still be a bigger problem, but I think the problem with Cronenworth is that when he moved from second to first, his offense dropped off further, and his defense relative to other first baseman wasn't that much better than it was compared to second baseman. So it essentially turned an average second baseman into a below average first baseman overall, and that really hasn't been a great swap for the team. Now the roster kind of demands it because you have Kim, you have Bogarts, you have Machado at third, and there's not really a great place for Cronenworth to move to. I think that in the end, he's someone sometime during the season he could be talked about in terms of a trade, even if the Padres have to eat some money, because there are some teams that he can play second base for, and he might be worth more to them than he is to the Padres.
Dan, final one for me is kind of a two-part question. Statistically speaking, what are the odds the Dodgers don't win the NL West? Like, are we talking 1 in 20 or beyond that? And then what do the projections say in terms of ranking the 5 teams right now in the division?
Well, the thing is that things are never as certain as people think they are. Mm-hmm. And as someone, it seems something weird to say for someone who does a lot of projections. But when you do the projections, you know just how complicated the future is. As great as the Dodgers look to be right now, they probably, even from the projections right now, they still probably go in with a 10-15% chance of not winning the division, because the Diamondbacks could surprise. The Giants might be a little more together and could surprise. Even the Padres, they underperformed their Pythagorean record by like 11 wins in 2024. This was or 2023. This was not as mediocre a team as their final record. So even if they've made some big losses, they could surprise. I mean, I was off on the 2021 Giants by 31 wins. Everyone else was too, but everyone reminds me since I'm a projection guy.
Right.
So the Dodgers, if they go into the season thinking that the division is guaranteed, those kinds of beliefs have a way of sneaking up on you at the end.
Yeah, they definitely do.
All right. We're good. I didn't know if you had another question. I saw you typing away over there.
I'm doing no.
Oh, Jim's doing something else. Dan, always appreciate your time, man. Great stuff. We'll check in with you as we get closer to spring training. We'll see if the Padres bolster this roster between now and spring training or not, but we appreciate you doing it.
Always fun, guys. Thanks for
All
having
right.
me.